Arthur Pendleton III lived in a house that was too big for one person. Everyone called him Arthur, but hardly anyone actually called him at all. His home wasn't really a house. It was more like a castle made of glass and quietness. It sat on a huge piece of land, surrounded by tall trees and a fancy iron gate that kept the world out. Inside, everything was perfect and expensive. The sofas were white and looked like no one had ever sat on them. The paintings on the walls were by famous artists, but they felt cold and distant. The only sound was the soft ticking of a giant clock in the main hallway, counting down the seconds of a very lonely day. Today was Thanksgiving. For most people, this was a day filled with the noise of family, the smell of good food, and the warmth of shared laughter. For Arthur, it was just another Thursday, only quieter. He had given all his staff the day off to be with their own families. His own children, a son and a daughter, were successful people living in different countries. They had sent him text messages in the morning. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad. Talk soon." He knew they meant well, but the messages just made the empty rooms feel bigger. He stood in front of the giant window in his living room, watching the gray sky. The first snow of the season had started to fall. Tiny, perfect flakes drifted down, slowly covering his perfectly cut grass in a thin white sheet. It should have been a beautiful sight, but to Arthur it just looked cold. He sighed, a deep sound that got lost in the big room. He was wearing a robe so soft and expensive it felt like a cloud, but he still felt a chill. His chef had prepared a full Thanksgiving meal for him before leaving. It was in the kitchen, covered in cling film. A full turkey just for him, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a pumpkin pie. It looked like a photograph from a magazine. The problem was, Arthur had no one to eat it with. The long, polished wooden dining table had only one place setting at the far end. A single plate, a single fork, a single knife, and a single glass. It looked less like a meal and more like a sad ceremony. He felt a strange restlessness. He needed to move, to do something, anything to break the silence. He remembered that he had forgotten to get the mail the day before. It was a small task, but it was a reason to go outside, a reason to walk. It was something to do. He slipped on a pair of leather loafers and stepped out into the cold afternoon air. The gravel of his long driveway crunched loudly under his feet, the only sound besides the whisper of the wind. His breath came out in small puffs of smoke. He walked past his fancy cars sitting silently in the garage. He walked past the empty swimming pool covered for the winter. He felt like a ghost in his own life, walking through a beautiful museum of his own success. He looked at the tall trees, their branches bare and black against the sky. He thought about all the Thanksgivings from long ago when his wife was still alive. The house used to be so full of life then, the smell of her perfume, the sound of her laughter, the chaos of having family over. He missed the noise. He missed the mess. Now everything was clean and quiet and perfectly in its place, and he hated it. As he got closer to the end of the driveway, he saw something that made him stop. There was a person at his mailbox. His first feeling was a flash of anger. This was his property. Who was trespassing on Thanksgiving? Was someone trying to steal his packages? He squinted, his eyes not as sharp as they used to be. It wasn't a grown adult. It was a child. A small girl huddled against the cold metal of the mailbox. She was very small, and her coat was a thin, faded pink thing that was no match for the cold weather. She was shivering. She was standing on her tiptoes, trying to peer into the small slot of the mailbox, her small fingers gripping the edge of the metal. Arthur's anger melted away, replaced by a deep confusion. What was a child doing out here all alone on a day like this? And why was she so interested in his mail? He felt a pang of worry, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. He took a few steps closer, his feet making noise on the gravel. The girl heard him and spun around. Her eyes were wide with sudden fear, like a deer caught in headlights. She looked like she was about to run. In that moment, Arthur saw her face clearly. She was a young black girl, her hair tied back in puffs, her cheeks red from the cold. She looked terrified. And in her hand, she wasn't holding a package or a stolen letter. She was clutching a piece of paper, a photograph that was crumpled and looked like it had been looked at 1,000 times. Arthur's voice, when he spoke, was softer than he meant it to be. The command was still there, but it was mixed with concern. "Excuse me," he said. "Can I help you? This is my house." The girl just stared at him, her knuckles white as she gripped the photograph. She looked like she was trying to find her voice, but the words were stuck. The snow continued to fall around them, settling on her shoulders and on Arthur's expensive robe. The billionaire and the little girl stood frozen in time at the end of the long, lonely driveway, a mystery beginning on the quietest Thanksgiving of his life. The girl's eyes were wide with a pure, animal fear. She looked like she was ready to dart away into the trees, a small creature caught somewhere she knew she shouldn't be. Arthur's first instinct, the one he used in boardrooms, was to demand an explanation. But seeing how small she was and how her whole body shivered from more than just the cold, that instinct faded. He took a slow step forward, careful not to scare her further. He held his hands up slightly, a gesture to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said, his voice lower and gentler now. "You're not in trouble, What are you doing out here all by yourself? It's freezing." The girl's gaze darted from his face to the big house behind him and back again. She clutched the piece of paper in her hand even tighter. It was a photograph, he could see it clearly now. The corner was bent and the paper was worn soft from handling. I was just looking," she whispered, her voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear it over the wind. "Looking for what?" Arthur asked. He looked at the mailbox. "Were you expecting a letter?" She shook her head, her tight curls bouncing. A single tear escaped and traced a clean line through the light dusting of snow on her cheek. "For my mom," she said, her voice cracking. That confused him even more. He glanced around the empty, snow-dusted driveway. "Your mom? Is she here?" "No," the girl said, and now the tears came in earnest, silent but steady. She looked down at the photograph in her hands. She used to work here. She said it was the most beautiful house in the world. She said the man who lived here was very sad but very kind." Arthur felt a strange jolt in his chest. The man who lived here was very sad. The words coming from this child hit him with a surprising force. He was just a sad man in a big house. Is that all he was? "Your mom worked for me?" he asked, his mind racing, trying to place her. There had been so many staff over the years. Housekeepers, gardeners, assistants. The girl nodded, finally lifting the photograph and holding it out for him to see. Her small hand was trembling. Arthur took a few more steps until he was close enough to see the picture clearly. The sight made his breath catch in his throat. It was a photo of a woman probably in her late 30s with a warm, proud smile. She was wearing a light blue nurse's uniform, and she was standing right there, on the front steps of his mansion with the big oak door visible behind her. It was Eleanor. Memories flooded back to him. Eleanor, she wasn't just staff. She had been his wife's private nurse during the final brutal year of her illness. While Arthur had felt helpless, trapped in his own grief and fear, Eleanor had been a rock. She was strong, she was gentle, and she had a calmness that filled the room. She could make his wife laugh, a real laugh even on the hardest days. She would bring her little cups of tea, read to her, and talk with her for hours. She treated his wife not just as a patient, but as a person. When his wife passed, the world had gone gray and silent. The funeral was a blur. The estate manager had handled all the practicalities, including letting the temporary medical staff go. Arthur had been too lost in his own pain to think about saying a proper goodbye to Eleanor. He had written her a generous check, of course, and sent a short thank-you note. But he had never seen her again. He'd assumed she had moved on to another family. He never once imagined her as someone's mother, a mother who talked about her time in this house. He looked from the photograph to the girl's face. He could see the resemblance now. She had her mother's eyes. "Eleanor," he said softly, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so long. "Your mother is Eleanor." The girl's face lit up with a fragile hope. "You remember her?" "Of course I remember her," Arthur said, and he was surprised to find that he meant it deeply. She was a very good person. She helped my wife very much." He looked at the girl, shivering in her thin coat. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Chloe," the girl whispered. "Chloe," Arthur repeated. "That's a pretty name. Now tell me, why were you looking for your mom in my mailbox?" "Where is she?" Chloe's bottom lip trembled. "She's at work. She has to work a double shift today at the new place. It's all the way across town. She left before the sun came up. She won't be home until after I'm asleep." Arthur's heart felt heavy. A double shift on Thanksgiving. He knew what that meant. It meant a job that didn't pay enough with bosses who didn't care. "So you came here all by yourself?" he asked, his voice full of wonder and concern. Chloe nodded, looking down at her worn-out sneakers. I took the bus. I had the picture. Mom talks about this place all the time. She said it was so quiet and peaceful. She said you were nice to her. I just wanted to see it. I thought if I could see the house, I could feel closer to her. I miss her. She said it so simply, with such raw honesty, that it almost broke Arthur right there on the spot. This little girl, missing her mother so much that she embarked on a solo journey across the city, guided only by a crumpled photograph and a child's love, to stand in the cold and look at a mailbox. He thought of his own quiet, empty house, his own full silent table. He thought of the single plate. And here was this child, whose mother was working herself to the bone, who just wanted a connection, any connection, to the person she loved most. The billionaire and the little girl were no longer just a man and a trespasser. They were two lonely people, brought together by the memory of a good woman on a day that was supposed to be about family. The cold air didn't feel so cold anymore. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but full of unspoken understanding. Arthur knew he couldn't just send her away. He couldn't let her get back on a bus and go home to an empty apartment. Well, Chloe, he said, his voice a little rough with emotion, you can't stand out here in the snow. How about you come inside with me? We can get you warmed up and we can call your mom. I'd like to talk to her. How does that sound? Chloe looked up at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign of a trick. Seeing only kindness, she gave a small, hesitant nod. Okay, she whispered. And with that, Arthur Pendleton III, one of the richest men in the state, reached out his hand. After a moment's pause, the small, cold hand of a little girl slipped into his. Together, they turned and started walking back up the long driveway, toward the big, quiet house that was about to become a little less quiet. The walk back to the house felt completely different from the walk out. The gravel under their feet seemed to crunch with a new, less lonely sound. Arthur held the girl's small, cold hand in his. It was so tiny and light in his own large, wrinkled one. He could feel her shivering, a constant, slight tremor that ran through her whole body. He led her not to the grand front door, but to a side entrance that opened directly into the warm, vast kitchen. As he opened the door, a wave of heat washed over them, smelling faintly of roasted turkey and herbs. The kitchen was a masterpiece of stainless steel and marble, but it was also the warmest room in the house. Chloe stopped on the doormat, her eyes wide as saucers. She looked around the room, taking in the shining counters, the giant stove, and the overhead racks of copper pots and pans. She seemed afraid to step on the clean tiled floor. Come in, child," Arthur said gently, closing the door against the cold. "Let's get you warmed up. First things first, let's get this wet coat off." He helped her out of the thin pink coat. It was damp from the snow and felt flimsy in his hands. Underneath, she wore a simple, well-worn sweater. He hung the coat on a hook by the door, where it looked small and out of place next to his own heavy wool overcoat. He pulled out one of the tall stools from under the kitchen island. "Here, sit down." Chloe climbed up onto the stool, her legs dangling. She placed the crumpled photograph carefully on the marble countertop, smoothing it out with her small hand as if it were a precious treasure. Arthur moved around the kitchen, a man in a world he usually only observed. He found a clean, fluffy towel and brought it over. "Here," he said, "dry your hair. You don't want to catch a cold." While she patted her hair, he went to the microwave. He remembered the chef had left a pot of apple cider with cinnamon and cloves. He poured some into a mug and heated it up. The rich, spicy scent began to fill the room. He placed the steaming mug in front of her. "Careful, it's hot," he said. "Sip it slowly. It will warm you from the inside out." Chloe wrapped her small hands around the warm mug. She blew on the surface of the liquid and took a tentative sip. A small, quiet sigh of pleasure escaped her lips. "It's good," she whispered, offering him the first tiny smile he had seen. "That's good," Arthur said, and he felt a small, genuine smile touch his own lips in return. He leaned against the counter opposite her, giving her space. The giant clock in the hall ticked, but now its sound was a backdrop to this strange new scene. "Now," he said, his voice soft, "let's call your mom. You must know her number by heart." Chloe nodded eagerly. She recited the number from memory, her voice growing a little stronger now that she was warm. Arthur took his phone from his robe pocket. He dialed the number carefully, his old fingers fumbling slightly on the screen. He put it on speakerphone so she could hear. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He saw the hope on Chloe's face start to fade. Then a click and a voice answered. It wasn't Eleanor's. Hello? A woman's voice said, sounding busy and distracted. Who's this? Hello? Arthur said, his voice taking on its formal, business-like tone for a moment. I am trying to reach Eleanor, please. It's quite important. Eleanor's on the floor. She can't come to the phone, the woman said shortly. We're short-staffed and it's crazy today. You'll have to call back later. Wait, please, Arthur said, a new authority in his voice. This is about her daughter. It is an emergency. He wasn't proud of the small lie, but he needed to get through. Chloe's eyes went wide at the word emergency. There was a pause on the other end. Her daughter? Hold on. They waited in silence for a minute that felt like an hour. Arthur could hear distant noises in the background. The clatter of dishes, a raised voice. Then a new voice came on the line, breathless and filled with fear. This is Eleanor. What's happened? Is Chloe okay? Where is she? Hearing her voice after all this time was like a punch to Arthur's chest. It was the same calm, gentle voice, but now it was tight with panic. Mom, Chloe cried out, leaning towards the phone. Chloe? Baby, what's wrong? Where are you? The relief in her mother's voice was instantly replaced by fresh worry. Arthur spoke up. Eleanor, this is Arthur Pendleton. Your daughter is with me. She is perfectly safe. She is in my kitchen drinking apple cider. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. He could almost picture her face trying to process his words. Mr. Pendleton? She finally said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. I don't understand. My daughter is at our apartment. She's supposed to be with the neighbor. Chloe, what is going on? Are you hurt? I'm okay, Mom, Chloe said, her voice small. I took the bus to the big house. The one from the picture. I wanted to see it. I'm sorry, you took the bus? All by yourself? Eleanor's voice was shaking now. Chloe, you know you're not supposed to. I was so worried. Mr. Pendleton, I am so sorry for this intrusion. I will leave right now and come get her. Please don't call the police. Arthur felt a deep pang of shame. Her first thought was that he would see her daughter as a criminal, a trespasser to be handled by the police. Eleanor, listen to me, he said, his voice firm but kind. There is no need to apologize. Chloe is not in any trouble. None at all. In fact, she was just telling me how much she misses you. He paused, looking at the little girl on the stool, who was now looking at the phone with watery eyes. I am not letting this child get back on a bus, and I am certainly not letting her go home to an empty apartment on Thanksgiving. You finish your shift. She will stay here with me until you can come. We will be waiting for you. The silence on the other end was now filled with a different emotion. He could hear a soft, choked sound. Was she crying? Mr. Pendleton, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, Arthur said, his decision final. I am telling you. Your job is safe. Take your time. Drive safely. We will be here. He gave her the address to the main gate and instructions on how to get in. When he ended the call, the kitchen was quiet again, but the silence felt different. It felt hopeful. He looked at Chloe. A single tear was rolling down her cheek, but she was smiling. Mommy's coming here? Yes, Arthur said, his own heart feeling strangely full. She is. And while we wait, I think we should find you something proper to eat. That turkey looks awfully lonely all by itself. For the first time in a very long time, the big, quiet house didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting for a guest. The moment the phone call ended, a new energy filled the quiet kitchen. The worry that had been tightening Arthur's chest was gone, replaced by a clear, simple purpose. He had a guest. He had a task. He looked at the little girl, Chloe, still perched on the stool. The fear in her eyes had melted away, leaving a spark of excitement. Mommy is really coming here? She asked again, as if she needed to hear it one more time to believe it. She really is, Arthur said. And this time his smile felt easier, more natural. But she won't be here for a little while, and we can't have you sitting there in those damp clothes. He looked at her worn sneakers, the cuffs of her pants slightly wet from the snow. First, we need to get you warm and dry. Then we need to think about dinner. He led her out of the kitchen and down a long carpeted hallway. Chloe followed him, her head constantly turning, trying to take in the high ceilings, the large paintings in heavy frames, and the glittering chandeliers. It was like walking through a museum after hours. He took her to a part of the house he almost never visited anymore, the guest wing. He opened a door to a room that was beautifully decorated but felt untouched, like a showroom. He went to a large closet and found a fluffy white bathrobe. It was meant for an adult, of course. When he handed it to Chloe, it was so large it almost swallowed her whole. "Here," he said. "It's not perfect, but it's warm. You can put this on while I find something else." He then went to another room, one that had been his daughter's a long, long time ago, before she grew up and moved away. He opened an old chest of drawers. It still held a few things from her childhood. He found a pair of thick, colorful socks that looked like they would fit. He also found an old soft sweatshirt with a faded college logo. It would be huge on Chloe, but it was clean and warm. He brought the items back to the guest bathroom. "These might be a bit big," he said, handing them to her. "But they're dry. You can change in here. I'll be right outside." He closed the bathroom door and waited in the hallway. He could hear the soft rustle of her taking off her damp sweater and pulling on the large, soft sweatshirt. He thought about his own daughter at that age, running through these same halls. The memory was sweet, but it also carried a sharp pang of how quickly time had passed. The door creaked open. Chloe emerged, a sight that made Arthur's heart squeeze. She was swimming in the sweatshirt, the sleeves hanging down past her fingertips. The collar was so wide it kept slipping off one shoulder. The fluffy white socks were like giant slippers on her small feet. She had rolled the sleeves of the bathrobe up as best she could, but it still trailed behind her on the floor. She looked small and lost in all the fabric, but her face was clean and she was smiling shyly. "You look very warm," Arthur said, his voice gentle. "I am," she said, holding her arms out. "It's soft." "Good," he said. "Now for the most important business. Food." They went back to the kitchen. Arthur looked at the perfectly prepared Thanksgiving feast under the cling film. It looked formal and cold. He didn't want a formal dinner. He wanted comfort. "Chefs make everything look so perfect," he said to Chloe, who was watching his every move. "But you know what? The best part of Thanksgiving is the messy bits. How about we make ourselves a proper plate right here in the kitchen?" "No rules." Chloe's eyes lit up. "We can eat in the kitchen?" "Absolutely," Arthur said. He found two simple, sturdy plates, not the fancy china from the dining room. He pulled up another stool so he could sit next to her at the island. He lifted the cling film. The smell of roasted turkey and herbs filled the air. "All right," he said, picking up a serving fork. "What's your favorite? Dark meat or white meat?" "I don't know," Chloe said. "Then we'll have both," Arthur declared. He put a generous slice of white meat and a juicy drumstick on her plate. He did the same for himself. He piled on fluffy mashed potatoes, making a little well in the top for the gravy. He spooned the rich, brown gravy over everything, just the way he liked it as a boy. He added a scoop of stuffing and some green beans. He handed Chloe a fork. "Dig in," he said. For a few minutes there was no talking. The only sounds were the clinking of forks on plates and little hums of pleasure from Chloe. She ate with a quiet intensity, and Arthur realized she must have been very hungry. He watched as she tried a bit of everything, her eyes closing for a second when she tasted the sweet potato casserole with its toasted marshmallow topping. "This is so good," she said, her voice muffled by a mouthful of mashed potatoes. "It is, isn't it?" Arthur agreed. He hadn't enjoyed a meal this much in years. Eating alone, even the most expertly prepared food had become a chore. But sharing this simple, messy plate with a child made every flavor seem brighter. As they ate, Chloe began to open up. The food and the warmth made her feel safe. "My mom," she said between bites. "She talks about your wife sometimes. She said she was very pretty and very brave. She said she had a nice laugh." Arthur stopped, his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at Chloe. No one had spoken about his wife to him in such a simple, kind way in a long time. People were either too afraid to bring her up, or they offered stiff, formal condolences. But this was just a memory, shared from one person to another. "Did she?" he said, his voice a little thick. "She did have a nice laugh. Your mother was so kind to her. I don't think I ever properly thanked her for that." Chloe just nodded as if this was a simple fact of the world. "Mom is kind to everyone." They finished their food and Arthur cleared the plates. He saw Chloe trying to stifle a yawn. The adventure, the big meal, and the warmth were making her sleepy. "Why don't we go wait in the living room?" he suggested. "It's more comfortable in there." He led her to the large room with the giant window. The snow was still falling outside, but now it looked peaceful, not lonely. He gestured to the big white sofa. "You can lie down here if you're tired." Chloe climbed onto the soft cushions. The oversized sweatshirt and robe made her look like a little nest of fabric. She curled up, resting her head on a plush cushion. Arthur sat in a large armchair nearby, watching her. Her eyes were getting heavy. She looked around the grand room at the high ceiling and the dancing fire in the fireplace. "Your house is very big," she murmured, her voice sleepy. "It's nice, but it's very quiet." Then her eyelids fluttered and closed. Her breathing became slow and even. She was asleep. Arthur sat in his chair, not moving. The house was quiet again, but this was a different kind of quiet. It was a protective quiet. It was filled with the soft sound of a child breathing. He looked at this brave little girl who had crossed the city to feel close to her mother, now sleeping trustingly on his sofa. He looked at the single, perfect place setting on his giant dining table, visible through the doorway. And for the first time, he didn't see just an empty chair. He saw all the chairs that should be filled. He saw the life that was missing. He didn't feel lonely sitting there. He felt like he was keeping watch. He was waiting for a mother to come for her daughter. And in that simple act of waiting, he felt more useful than he had in a very, very long time. Arthur wasn't sure how long he sat there watching the little girl sleep. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, casting a warm orange glow on her face. She looked peaceful, all the fear and worry from the driveway completely gone. In her sleep, she curled her hand under her chin, the too long sleeve of the sweatshirt covering her hand like a mitten. He felt a powerful urge to protect this small, trusting creature who had wandered into his lonely world. He must have dozed off himself in the comfortable chair, because the sound of the doorbell, a low, melodic chime echoing through the house, made him jump. It was a sound he so rarely heard. He stood up quickly, his old bones protesting. He glanced at Chloe. She stirred slightly at the noise, smacking her lips together, but didn't wake up. He moved quietly to the front door, his heart beating a little faster. He opened the heavy wooden door. Standing on his porch, covered in a light dusting of snow, was Eleanor. She looked exactly as he remembered, and yet completely different. The calm professional nurse was gone. In her place was a mother. Her eyes were wide with a frantic worry, her face pale. She was wearing a simple winter coat, and she was breathing heavily, as if she had run from her car. "Mr. Pendleton," she gasped, her eyes immediately searching the room behind him. "My daughter. Is she—" Before Arthur could answer, her gaze landed on the living room, on the small form sleeping on the white sofa, swallowed by the large clothes. All the air seemed to go out of her. Her shoulders slumped in a wave of pure relief. She brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "She's fine, Eleanor," Arthur said softly, stepping aside. "She's just sleeping. Please come in. It's freezing out there." Eleanor stepped inside, her movements slow, almost hesitant. She couldn't take her eyes off her daughter. She walked quietly into the living room and knelt down beside the sofa. She reached out a trembling hand and gently brushed a stray curl from Chloe's forehead. The love in that simple gesture was so powerful it filled the entire room. Chloe's eyes fluttered open. For a second, she was confused. Then she saw her mother's face. A beautiful, sleepy smile spread across her features. "Mommy," she whispered. "Hi, baby," Eleanor whispered back. Her voice choked with emotion. "I'm here." She gathered Chloe into her arms, oversized robe and all, and held her tightly. She buried her face in her daughter's hair for a long moment, just breathing her in. Arthur stood back, feeling like he was witnessing something very private and very sacred. Finally, Eleanor pulled back, holding Chloe by the shoulders. "Chloe, you scared me so much. You can never ever do that again. Do you understand?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Chloe said, her own eyes getting watery. "I just missed you. I know, baby. I missed you too." She hugged her again, then stood up, turning to face Arthur. The professional mask was trying to come back, but the emotion was still raw on her face. "Mr. Pendleton, I don't even know what to say. Thank you for your kindness, for taking care of her, for everything." She looked down, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry for the disturbance. We'll get out of your hair now." She started to help Chloe off the sofa, ready to leave. "Wait," Arthur said. The word came out louder than he intended. Both mother and daughter looked at him. Arthur's mind was racing. He couldn't just let them walk out the door. Not back into the cold. Not on Thanksgiving. The image of his single plate on the dining table flashed in his mind. The silence of the house before Chloe arrived echoed in his ears. "Eleanor," he began, his voice rough with a feeling he couldn't name. "Please don't go." He gestured toward the dining room. "Look." They both looked through the wide doorway. The long, polished table, the single place setting at the far end, the uneaten food. It told a story of profound loneliness without a single word. "I was going to eat alone," Arthur said, the truth of it hanging in the air. "This child, Chloe, she didn't disturb my Thanksgiving. She saved it." He looked at Eleanor, his eyes sincere. "You both have somewhere to be. But I don't. Please, stay. There is more food than I could eat in a week. Let's have dinner. Together." Eleanor stared at him, completely stunned. She looked from his face to her daughter's hopeful one and back to the lonely table. She had worked in this house. She knew the kind of man Arthur Pendleton was supposed to be. Distant, private, living in his world of wealth and silence. This invitation was the last thing she ever expected. Chloe tugged on her mother's coat. "Can we, Mom, please? We had some in the kitchen and it was really good." Eleanor looked at her daughter's face, still flushed from sleep, and then at Arthur's, which held not pity, but a genuine, quiet plea. The last of her resistance melted away. She gave a slow, amazed nod. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, we'll stay. Thank you, Mr. Pendleton, thank you so much." What happened next was something the grand dining room had not seen in years. Arthur didn't just lead them to the table. He pulled out a chair for Eleanor. He found another smaller chair for Chloe, piling it with cushions so she could reach the table. He went back to the kitchen and brought out 2 more beautiful place settings, placing them not at the far end but right next to his. He brought out all the food, the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the stuffing, the pies, and he put it all right in the middle of the table, family style. "No formalities tonight," he declared, and as they began to eat, a miracle occurred. The silence was broken, not by polite, empty conversation, but by real talk. Chloe chattered about her school, her friends, the bus ride over. Eleanor talked about her new job, the challenges, her long hours. She spoke to him not as a former boss, but as a person. Arthur listened. He really listened, and he found himself talking too. He told a funny story about his daughter when she was Chloe's age. He talked about his wife, not with sadness, but with a smile, remembering her love of gardening. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings. Real, genuine laughter. The kind that comes from a full heart, not a full wallet. Arthur looked around the table. At Eleanor's warm, smiling face. At Chloe, with a little bit of gravy on her chin, giggling at something he had said. He saw the empty chairs, but for the first time he didn't feel their emptiness. He felt the presence of the 2 people who were actually there. A warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so strong it overwhelmed him. It was gratitude. It was connection. It was the simple human joy of not being alone. His vision blurred. He tried to blink it away, but it was no use. A tear escaped and rolled slowly down his cheek. Then another. He didn't sob. He just sat there letting the tears fall, a quiet, happy smile on his face. Eleanor saw. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Chloe saw the tears too. Her little face grew serious. "Mr. Arthur," she asked, her voice full of concern. "Why are you crying? Are you sad?" Arthur looked at the little girl who had searched for her mother in a mailbox and found her way into his heart. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick but clear. "I'm not sad at all. For the first time in a very long time, I'm really truly happy, and in that moment, surrounded by the simple blessings of food and family, the billionaire knew that this wasn't the end of a strange Thanksgiving. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where the big quiet house might finally learn to make some noise.